Hi, everybody. All right. Well, it looks like we're live, and I am going to go ahead and get some things started, get ready to share my screen. My name is Dean, by the way, your speaker today. Let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. There it is. Awesome. All right. So we're going to get started here. It is great to see everyone. My name is Dean Schuster. I am coming to you from the United States on the East Coast, and this session is the fundamental anatomy of digital product goals. So we're going to have a really good time today. There's going to be some practical stuff in here that you could take away and use right away. I will finish a good bit before our 45-minute limit. So we're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers. And I know that's usually really important with this subject because it's practical and it's a how-to, and I can give you some help with that. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay. So now I'm a UX person, user experience person, and I own a company called TrueMatter. We're a UX consultancy. That means all we do is user experience, and we work with all kinds of companies. We work with technical companies, we work with creative companies, marketing companies, and business strategy companies to do all the work we do. And we specialize in complex digital products. And I've been doing this stuff since the .com days. So it's been a while. I mean, that puts a date on me a little bit. And one thing I've learned about digital products, sites, apps, software throughout my career is that they often fail. Now, they fail for lots and lots of reasons. It could be that they simply didn't live up, or failure means, they didn't live up to their promise, right? Or they outright crashed and burned. It could be anything like that. Now, in some cases, products fail for really big reasons, like they didn't have enough money, or the idea was just not very good. A lot of that stuff way back in the .com days. Or maybe the market just wasn't ready for it. There was lots of stuff that failed back in the .com days that later, same idea, worked. So there's just a lot of big reasons why things fail. But sometimes digital products, sites, apps, software, they fail even if they have plenty of money. They fail even if the idea is excellent. And they fail even if the market seems really ready for them. So when something fails and everything all is going for it, everything is positive in this regard, it's a failure of making. Something's going on in the making of a product that is causing it to be a problem. And that's what we're going to talk about today, making, and how failure can occur that way and how we can avoid it. So all types of teams fail at making digital products. Okay. And then we're going to talk about various types of teams. Now, it's going to feel a little bit like I'm stereotyping these teams. And to a certain extent, I am doing that. But every observation you're about to hear comes from experience of working with teams like this throughout my career. So these things tend to be true. So let's look at technical teams. These are development teams. And what troubles do they have? Well, first of all, development teams, as you can imagine, are completely focused on functionality. They care about how something works. And so they care deeply about functional requirements and diving on into development. They're really not good at the creative side, the design side, or maybe even the business strategy side. And they definitely aren't connecting well with users. Just is not a thing that's happening for them, despite what they say. And their documentation looks a lot like this, right? When they're focused on a digital product, they are thinking about technical requirements, technical definition, development processes, because their processes are everything and they are completely attuned to development, I assure you, to the exclusion, usually, of things like design, marketing, content, or users, really. And this is their chief failing. And that's why a lot of the products they make have problems because they're not connected well to users and they lack a lot of these other things. Now, creative agencies, this is going to be a lot of the folks here, right, in this conference. We represent agencies, digital agencies, creative agencies, marketing agencies, what have you. And the problems here are that these companies are typically leading with a marketing strategy or they're leading with fairly strong visual focus. And the types of things they are creating have to do with brand or brand marketing, right? So if you look at the type of deliverables that a creative agency will have, you're looking at these, and you've probably seen a lot of these things before: a marketing brief, a creative brief, marketing plans, things of this nature. Now, the problem with these firms is that all of this interesting documentation is super valuable and super good, but it hardly ever is connected to actual use by real users, real tasks, real use of a system. And that's a problem for creative agencies as well. They also tend to farm out all of their development. So they get some of the limitations and problems of being a creative firm or marketing firm, and they get the limitations and problems of the technology side too, because those companies bring their problems with them. Now, if we think about strategic or business consultants, these folks are different and they are looking at problems from a very high level, 30,000 feet high. They're looking at big trends, big themes. They're talking about business strategy. They're talking about markets, industries, directions that someone in the C-level suite will find very compelling and interesting. But they're rarely dealing with users or making at all, right? They're not really spending time on implementation itself. So the types of documentation that they're going to provide looks a lot like this. This is a common table of contents for a management consulting or a business consulting firm. They're talking about transformation and they're talking about digital maturity and all these big, broad themes. If they're dealing with the making of a thing at all, they're directing it from a high level and they're bringing in other firms like creative firms, like technical firms. And no matter what, they're not really connected to everyday use by real users. They're not really connecting that initial idea that a company has all the way to implementation. Now, that means when we get a product, and we look at it as users, it looks odd to us and we don't really receive it very well. And that's what I mean by digital product failure. We're like, someone gives us this lovely gift, they tie it up with a bow, whether they're a technical firm, creative firm, or whatever. And we look at it and say, this is okay. I guess it's just what I never wanted. I never wanted this. What is this? Because it doesn't connect with them personally. This great idea that a company has, and all digital products begin with an internal idea, are not being connected to users and driven all the way through the end. And this is the problem that we should be trying to solve. So connecting users and stakeholders, right? This real research, really getting to know them and understand them, is just something that is routinely not done. It's shamefully not done by really any of those groups. Great digital products, this is Airbnb, are just not an accident. They are great because they are connected deeply to how users act online, to what they need to do, what they want to do, what delights them, what motivates them, what gets something done. And that is brought through all aspects of the product: the creative, the technical, the business strategic. It's all there. And it all somehow got brought all the way through to the end. A product is launched and it's amazing. It's not an accident, and it happens all the time. Airbnb is just a great example. If you've ever booked a vacation, well, back before COVID and hopefully soon, you know that what I'm saying is true. So today we're going to figure that problem out. And that's why we're talking about the fundamental anatomy or the makeup of digital product goals, how you take those high-level goals and get them all the way through to the end of your product, like something that Airbnb did, like something that works wonderfully, perfectly, excellently for users. That's what we're talking about. So we have 5 parts of goals. We're going to go through all of them, and then we'll do a little QA about them. All the goals need to have a clear context. Talk about that. They need to be simple. Obviously, as I've been saying, they need to be connected to users. They need to predict a future state, and you need to be able to measure them super easily. So let's talk about context for a goal. Now, if you are researching users and figuring out what to do with a digital product, hopefully you're starting with discovery. And that's a super important thing to do. Not everyone does it, so I'm not going to assume it. But a lot of times, different types of firms have their own brand of discovery that focuses on what they care about the most. Creative firms care about the creative stuff. Technical firms care about the technical stuff and the requirements. Strategic firms care about high-level strategy. We're talking about real-world use and understanding people. So what we do when we do discovery is we create something called a UX roadmap. This is a roadmap for real-world use by the people who are going to deal with this thing day in and day out. And the UX roadmap contains all sorts of stuff. It contains strategy, goals, structure. It contains platform, tools, requirements, budget, scope. Basically, we're figuring things out about what a digital product should be. And what we want to focus on is that end result. Of course, it's a document for us. Doesn't have to be some big old document for you. It could be a presentation, but this is how we do it. And we have pieces, parts to it that really matter to us. We try to make them extremely easy to read and digest because no one wants to read some big discovery report. And notice that all the things we're creating have to do with users and use and why and how tasks are going to be met out. That is the important thing to consider when you're considering discovery and a roadmap. Now, you might have some of these things or all these things. All we're going to talk about today is a little piece of that roadmap about goals, users, and strategy. And we're going to put those two things together today. That part of the roadmap, the most important part of that discovery, is what we're going to talk about. And that's the context that any goal needs to have. It needs to have a context of a real discovery. Okay, that's fine. Let's talk about the goals themselves. They have to be simple and they have to be prioritized. Okay, really cool. Now, a goal is a big thing, right? It's a concise statement of a result. I want to get to a certain result. I want my company to make more money next year. It's a very high level goal. Right? Goals are big things. Goals are big things. Now, we're going to pick a situation. This is actually a real situation that our company has really worked through. So none of this is fake. This is all very real. We just kept all of the names out of it. Situation is this. A company has a complex, outdated web app. Happens all the time. And it's accessed not very frequently, but it's accessed by novice users, people who, man, they are not tech savvy people, but they're required to use it. So we know people who aren't tech savvy are required to use a thing, and that thing is old and outdated. So we want to fix it and we want to make it new. Very common case for any type of digital product maker. So we know we have 2 goals right away, right? We don't have to think about them very hard. We want to modernize a web app. And another one of the goals for this was it's got to be easier to use because these are novice users and they have such a hard time. And our discovery yielded a lot of this information through observation of users, through testing of users, through surveys, through talking with them, through interviewing stakeholders. All of this comes out. Now, what we're going to do is we're just going to label these goals at first. We want to know which one of these goals are internal and which are external. Fair enough. The internal goal is obvious. Modernize this thing. And the external goal is obvious. Make it easier for me, please. Very easy. So now we know we have a user-based goal and we have an internal goal. Now what I want you to do is flip-flop, okay? If your internal goal is first, make the user goal first. Always put the user goal first in your prioritization. It will help you immensely. So now we have a user-based goal. Make it crazy easy to use. Awesome. And we have an internal goal, which is modernize that app. So far, so good. We're prioritizing. Now, through our discovery, we found out what it meant to be easy to use. Excuse me. And we're just referencing that when we think about our goals. We know that users just hated all the work they had to do with an app. It was just too much stuff to do, and it didn't fit what they did day to day. So we know what easy to use meant to them. And those were the two big ones. So we sort of segment that first goal. There's really a couple things to it. And on the internal side, what we learned is that honestly, modernizing just means starting over. And really the problem they had with users because their app was outdated and bad and old was that trust was gone. So they said, that's interesting. It's really a matter of starting over and rebuilding trust. This all comes out in your discovery if you've done it well. And we're just restating the goals to be much more interesting and accurate. So now we have really 3 goals because that user goal was really broken up into 2. And we phrased it differently. We really want to make these goals interesting because if you make a goal interesting, the solution will be interesting. We want the app to do all the work. We want the app to work for novices. So we want the app to be the expert. That's what will make it easy to use. And we want the app's task flow to just work right with what things people do every day. And we need to rebuild a trust in an app that people must use. These are 3 goals, good goals. You might have more goals, right? 5 to 7 goals. Let's just focus on 3 for now. These are the first 3 we've got. And look, we've prioritized them. We now have number 1, number 2, number 3. User goals always come first. We got our prioritization. Boom. Now we're going to connect those big goals to what users do every day. And here's where the power starts coming in. We're going to connect those goals to users. Now, we're going to do that by adding objectives. An objective is just a thing that you do. That's an action. You can measure it, and it helps you get to that goal. That's all. That's all an objective is. More specific. So let's go and focus only on our number 1 goal. You'll do this process for every goal. Let's just focus on number 1. We're going to make the app the expert. What are some objectives we might identify to fulfill that goal? And these are the ones that we sorted out for this company. We're going to give them a step-by-step approach. We're not going to make them do all the work or figure things out step by step. Wizards, something easy. We're going to automate all the time because we learned from users that they're so tired of doing all this work and copying things in a million times. So we're going to automate processes, pre-populate data, make sure the users only have to put something in one time and the app remembers. This will help make it easier. Good objective to reach that goal. And another objective is pretty simple. It's just what I say is to lose the legalese. And that means to make the app's words and communication more normal, more like how people really talk. These folks aren't lawyers, they're just people. So we're going to talk like they talk, and that will help make things simple and easy, and it'll make the app do the work. Boom. We have 3 very good objectives. You might not have 3 objectives. You might have 2 to fulfill a goal. In this case, we had 3. They're very strong. They're very actionable, and doggone it, we can measure these things, which we'll get to in a minute. Okay, so far so good. Now, what we're going to do with our goals and our objectives is we're going to predict a future state. If we do what we're doing right, we're going to get to a different place. So, a hypothesis, right, is just basically an idea based on evidence that you want to have further study to sort out if you're right or not. So we're going to make a hypothesis about our goals. We are simply going to figure out whether our goals are right. And we're going to identify what we expect to happen if we do this. So here's what we know. Here's what we know. We want to guide users with a step-by-step approach. So we're focusing on one objective, that sense of making a wizard, step-by-step wizard. Well, we know from discovery that people were stressed out when they used the app. They complained that they made a lot of errors, right? They had to figure things out themselves, so they made mistakes. It took forever to do because they weren't being guided through it. And they had to call support like all the time to figure things out. So these are the things we're trying to solve when we say we want to make something step by step. And if we solve these things, this is what we can expect to happen. This is the key. People will have less anxiety about use of the app. Okay. They'll probably have fewer errors if we give them a step-by-step approach. They will probably save time, right? If they don't have to figure things out all the time. And they probably will not call support as much if this thing works correctly. Now, these are expectations. These are indicators or predictions. This is something that Google research calls signals. And there's a really good HEART framework, H-E-A-R-T, HEART framework, devised by Google research that identifies this particular part of our process as a signal. It's a notion. It's evidence that you are doing something right. Now, when we share this with people and clients, they don't understand what a signal is. So we call it a win. People understand that. Clients understand that. This is a win you can expect to get if we do this objective right. So we're going to go ahead and make the app itself the expert. Remember, that's our big goal. We're going to look at our first objective, guide users with a step-by-step approach. Now, here's the great thing. We now have expected wins. If we do that, we expect less anxiety, fewer errors, we're going to save time, less support burden. This is what should happen if we get this right. Now we're forming a really powerful goal. This is pretty awesome stuff, really. And we can do that with each and every objective, right? We can figure out what our expected wins are for each objective that we have, including having clearer language. So we have a pretty strong goal makeup by this point, but we're not quite done yet, because a goal only gets us to an end state if we can measure something, if we can tell that we did it. It's one thing to predict, it's another thing to know. So at the end of our process, we've got to measure. So let's talk about that, because this is our evidence, proof that we did it right. So let's think of high-level metrics and methods, right? Things that we can look to objectively to say whether something worked or not. Well, we could look at error rates and failure rates. We could look at user satisfaction. We could look at how long it takes people to do things. We can measure that. Or we could look at call center volume. How many calls does the support line get? We can look at all that stuff. And there's a way in which we can measure all of it. So if we want to understand failure rates, we can look to user tests. If we want to understand satisfaction, we can do surveys or things like that. If we want to understand time per task, also user testing. And if we want to understand call center volume, we can interview call center professionals. We could look at call center analytics. There's a lot of ways that we can identify to figure this out. And they'll be different based on organization, of course. But now we're really putting together a powerful goal matrix here, because now we're adding in measures to each objective. If you remember, we're guiding users like that wizard, that step-by-step approach. We expect to get good wins, and all the way across, now we expect how we'll measure whether we were right or not about those expected wins. So for instance, if we want fewer user errors, we expect we'll have fewer errors if we offer up a step-by-step approach. We can measure that. We can measure that with user testing. We can measure error rates. We can measure time per task, and we can find out whether or not that win happened, whether or not that thing we did actually worked. That is tying a big idea in strategy, big strategy, all the way through to the end, all the way through to completion and measurement, always based on the user. So we can do that with every single one of our objectives for our big goal. See that? Pretty awesome. Very easy to see how we can go all the way across. It's amazing stuff. Now, here's how we put all of that great stuff together into one batch that's powerful for you, that you can do really right away with your next project. Now, there's a practicality to this process, which is sort of beautiful. And we want to make sure that it's super easy to do and digest. So the first thing we want you to do when you're putting this together is put it together just like you saw here. You need to keep it really, really simple. You need to say as little as possible, as briefly as possible when you're putting together goals, objectives, wins, and measures. Because honestly, if it's something you can really do, it's something you could really say briefly. And to be really frank, no one is going to read it if it's a big book. This stuff I showed you in this simple presentation, that's the whole real thing. That is a real unpacking of a real goal for a real project. This is one goal, the most important goal, with 3 objectives, the wins and the measures, all right there. That's it. That's on one page. That's nothing. So you can imagine each goal might have a page in your roadmap that you create. Very easy to read, very easy to digest, very easy to reference. Super important. So what this helps you do is it helps you work with your internal teams now to get agreement early. We are agreeing that these are the big things we're after. These are the objectives and ways we're going to go after it. If we do this right, we're expecting to get this win, and here's how we measure. And together we're going to agree. We might argue early. I don't think that goal is more important than this goal, or we need better or different objectives. I think if this objective works, we'll probably see this, won't we? All that stuff forces you to have these really important discussions as early as possible. And it helps drive agreement because you have to get to a set of goals that you're really going to build based on. So you're going to have to force agreement early, get the big arguments out of the way. And the beauty here is that once you start, these goals become a reference for your team. So if you are working on, let's say, any kind of app, and you get to a particular screen, let's say it's a pay my bill screen, all sorts of decisions are being made about this screen based on objectives and goals that you put together early in the process. Is this a step-by-step process that's working enough? Are we using the right language for people? Are we automating where possible here? You can constantly refer and judge what you're doing based on the big stuff. That is powerful, powerful stuff. And I assure you, very few people do it. And if you do it, your digital product's going to be strong and powerful. I assure you, Airbnb does this stuff. You might even judge things as complex as, super complex web apps can be judged based on the things you're putting together. You might have some simple, very simple website that is just a corporate website. In this case, Simple Site uses this method. Basically, we figured out in our big goal for this site was that no one looking at this site who was making a decision about working for this firm cared at all about anything they had to say except one thing. And that was how many cases they closed, how many cases this law firm settled before court. That's all that mattered because this is insurance law. And by the time we figured all that out in discovery, we agreed with the client together that if that's all people care about, that's all we should say on the homepage. This became a massively successful project just because we tied a big goal to an actual piece of work that actually had everything to do with what their users did, wanted, and cared about. That's it. Just a simple site. Now, the trick to measurement, and this is extremely important, is that you have to measure before you start working. You have to form a baseline of measurement so later, when you measure again, you can tell what changed. Measurements only mean something if it's in a context of what an earlier state was. So this is a real thing that happened with this project. Okay, so we had web application maintenance measurement, right? Before launch of this system, it took 5 people averaging about 10 hours a week to maintain it. That's like 50 hours a week. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of time. And in an organization, that costs money. After launch, 3 months after launch, we measure again. How's that going? What is maintenance like now? Now it takes the equivalent of 2 people averaging 3 hours a week. It's basically 6 hours a week. That is a massive savings. It doesn't take an accountant to figure out that that's a big money savings. And over the course of a year or 2 or 3, that adds up in a major way. That adds up into real money that they're not spending that justifies cost for the project itself. But it also frees up people to do more valuable things. Hugely important. And when you can point to that and show that the work you did had direct value, I guess you know what happens as a result. The next time they need to do something, they're talking to you. They're not even worrying about anything else. Now, going to RFP another project, they're going right to you. Now, these also help you get and keep buy-in, because if you've agreed early to all this stuff, you could use this as a tool to leverage buy-in, because there's always stakeholders that offer you problems, and there's always opinionated voices that want something. And when you're pointing to things like the data you got through research or the measurements you made and the results you got, you're able to be the person who has the data. You're able to keep things on track and not let them get sidelined by people who have agendas or strong opinions and are not related to what users actually need. So the data really are everything. It's super important. And of course, it's a cycle. So you don't need to rest on your laurels, because if you're measuring something and you're realizing that some things went far better than you expected and some things didn't go quite as well, you can understand right away which things now you have to start evolving and which things have to change. Maybe your objectives need to change. Maybe your expectations need to change. Maybe you've solved and reached a certain goal and you have to recalibrate goals because things are new now. You have a pattern by which you can do this, and I strongly encourage you to do it. Okay, this is massively great stuff if you're working on digital products. I super encourage you to do it. And mostly, I want to encourage you that you actually can do this, regardless of which of those particular entities you might have come from, technical, marketing. In our case, in this conference, chances are you're coming from that marketing perspective or that creative perspective or that design perspective. Okay, that is my presentation. Now, my name is Dean. You can reach me in all these ways. You could find me online if you want to talk further. But right now, what we can do is we can do a little bit of QA. We've got roughly 10 minutes left. So what I want to do is open up to questions you might have. I really appreciate your attention and time. This is always fun to talk about. So I will now monitor our chat here to see what questions we might have. And while I'm waiting for a question, I can answer a question I get all the time, and that is, how do you manage that person who isn't buying into the process, or how do you manage that unruly stakeholder? That's someone who has that strong opinion and it has nothing to do with all this hard work that you've done. Well, the first thing I can say is we're going to go back to discovery and we're going to focus on what we learned through research or testing or surveys or whatever, or interviews with stakeholders. First thing we're going to do is go back to that. And we're going to say, during research, during discovery, these things were uncovered, these things were found out. And you can say to a stakeholder down the line. What you are suggesting goes against everything we found out in discovery. So either we got discovery wrong and we have to ask more people and test better, or your idea might not be the way we need to go right now. So, how about this? Depending on the influence of the stakeholder, you can suggest returning back to discovery and trying some things that will perhaps help. But I assure you, if you have data, it's particularly important if it's later in the process and you have measurement data and you're learning a lot of things, that's powerful in a discussion with a stakeholder. Many stakeholders are actually very well-meaning, even if they're opinionated, and they'll listen to data. If they don't listen to that data that you have, you might not win the fight, because especially if that stakeholder has influence. If you don't win that fight, you can at least rest assured that you have done your professional duty to the fullest extent you can. You've done right. And other people will see it. So you could be patient and rest that your process is good and worked. Or you might see that a stakeholder gets their way and something doesn't work well. And people will look and see that the path you had was right. Another way to forestall that problem in the first place, to avoid having that uncomfortable or bad user or stakeholder rather interaction later, is to include the stakeholders in your discovery in the first place. If you have extremely influential stakeholders and you know that's who they are, what you want to do is make sure they're with you in discovery. If you're observing users using a current system that you need to fix, have stakeholders observe with you. Have stakeholders attend user testing with you. This will be more than enough to change the mind of the most stubborn person. And if someone's going to be stubborn after they see users fail at a thing, or they're going to be stubborn after they watch users struggle, then they were always going to be stubborn. And it was always going to be a problem. So, what you need to do is think carefully about those relationships, but focus on bringing them into this process, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to look at our list here. I don't have QA or chat yet, so I am here for another 5 minutes or so. So I encourage you to do a couple more things. You can actually Google the HEART framework that talks a little bit about signals, which is part of what we talked about today. But mostly, this process was devised just from trial and error, just from simply not getting it right until we kept this process moving and connected users to this end strategy to the point where we're good and we actually devised something that worked. So, in a way, this whole presentation is predicated upon our failures, what we tried and didn't work, and what works better for us now. If you are a design firm, a marketing firm, making or contributing to digital products, chances are you're not doing this type of discovery, and it may be new, or maybe you're working with UX professionals. I don't know. But in terms of user experience, this is the real stuff. A lot of times in a design firm or marketing firm, the word UX is just thrown around. It's hard to even know what it means. It basically means these days in a lot of brand firms or marketing firms, kind of means design, but it really means uncovering and understanding users, uncovering their needs and figuring out how to make something that gets there, if that makes sense. So I encourage you to embrace that side of it, which is not typically done in marketing circles. All right. Well, that's been my presentation. I do appreciate very much your attention. I haven't noticed QA, so I'm trying to make sure I'm looking carefully. Let's see here. Yeah, good, 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 good. Okay. I see one note, yeah, a specific example of what failed. Yeah. Um, when you don't connect users to a final end result, you basically have been guessing all along. And that's the real problem with most approaches, because guesses could be great. You could completely guess right, or more likely you'll guess wrong. So it might be that an example for us was I remember creating a system. This was a web app, and we thought we understood users well. And we thought, because, we're UX professionals and we understand what people do and what they don't do and human behavior. And so we made some guesses about what people might do and what people would do. And we were very proud of those guesses. Now, the system had a login to it as well. And we, once we launched it, the system had serious, serious problems. And all those problems were associated with a thing that we didn't even spend any time and attention to, which was the login. This was very early in our careers. And it's when we found out, this is decades ago now, that the real issue for most people with digital products is login, not even getting through to have other advanced problems with your wonderful fancy interface. It's actually getting in at all. And most user problems happen at the login stage. So our early failures were all about login. And that taught us a great deal about testing with users and observing their activity. And now over time, standards have evolved in this area, which helps a ton. Uh, but it also taught us to not assume that just because we were smart, that we had a good idea. And it meant relying more on discovery, because, there's nothing like creating a system and you think it makes sense to someone. You think some sort of document upload process or whatever makes complete sense and it's obviously easy, only to watch users completely fail, not get it, and think you never listened. That hurts. And you only want to feel that pain so often. So you go back and learn from them. So um, that's a specific example, but I would also say that when it comes to understanding users, there's always something to learn and there's always something to uncover. You can never assume you're right. And the more experience you get and the more knowledge you get, the more dangerous it is that you'll assume that you're right. You have to assume that you don't know. You have to assume that you're not sure. That's why that first step in what we're doing is so important. That's why that discovery is so pivotally important. And remember, that's the step that most of these companies simply are not doing, which is why you get a lot of apps that are hard to use, which is why you get a lot of websites that are hard to use. That's why it's 2021 and the world is full of really hard to use stuff. This is why. This is why. Okay. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed you being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the conference. The conference has been amazing. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you do as well. And have a great rest of the day. I think there's an afternoon and then we're done. So thanks again. They're going to end this in about a minute. So if you have any other questions that you missed, or maybe I didn't address something perfectly, find me online. We'll talk about it, and I'll do my best to answer that question. So thank you all. Really appreciate it. And let's see. Great. Awesome. And I'm checking to see if I've missed any questions. Very good. Awesome. And let's come back. Q&A. Great. Okay. I think we got it all. Bye, everybody.